Fog swallows the road before the town even appears. 1 second the highway stretches empty and gray, the next, it's just gone. Daniel brakes hard. Tires scream. The world beyond his windshield dissolves into white nothing, and through it, faint, almost tender, a child's laughter echoes. Not possible, not out here. His fingers tighten around the steering wheel until his knuckles pale. He hasn't heard that sound in 6 years. Not since the fire, not since Silent Hill took everything. He told himself he would never come back. Swore at the graveside with ash still drifting through the sky like sick snow. But 3 nights ago, a package arrived with no return address. Inside, only a drawing. Crayons, crooked lines, a house by a lake, 3 stick figures holding hands. And written in the uneven handwriting he knows better than his own name, "Daddy, I'm waiting." Emily's favorite purple crayon, the one melted at the tip from the night the sirens wailed. So he drives into the fog. The sign emerges slowly, like it's ashamed to be seen. Welcome to Silent Hill. The paint is peeling. Rust eats the metal edges. Beneath it, someone has carved a single word deep into the wood. Lee R. Daniel stares at it longer than he should. The air smells wrong burned metal and something sweet underneath, like rotting flowers. His boots crunch against gravel as he steps out. No wind, no birds. Just the distant groan of something shifting where no building should still stand. He walks past storefronts frozen in decay. Windows cracked. Mannequins half melted, their plastic faces sagging as if they tried to scream and failed. The town hasn't healed. It hasn't changed. It's preserved, like a wound that refuses to close. His chest tightens. He remembers carrying Emily through these streets while ash fell like rain, her small arms around his neck, coughing, crying, asking why the sky was on fire. He couldn't answer her then. He still can't. A siren wails. Not from a car, not from anywhere human. It rises from the bones of the town itself, a metallic howl that vibrates through his ribs. Daniel freezes. He knows this sound, the warning, the shift. Fog thickens, darkens, swallowing color until the world drains into rust and shadow. Fences twist, metal bleeds through brick. The pavement splits open like a healing scar torn apart again. He whispers to himself, barely audible. It's not real. None of this is real. But his heartbeat disagrees. Fast, violent, alive. Footsteps scrape behind him. He turns. Nothing. Just an alley breathing darkness. Then, there, a small silhouette at the far end. A child, long hair hanging limp over her shoulders. She stands perfectly still, watching. Emily? The name breaks in his throat. The figure tilts her head. Slow. Curious. The way she used to when pretending not to understand a joke. He takes a step forward. The ground pulses beneath his feet. Barbed wire bursts from the concrete, snapping upward like veins dragged to the surface. Daniel stumbles back, barely avoiding the spikes. When he looks up again, the child is closer. Too close. Her dress is burned at the hem, skin pale as candle wax, and her eyes. God, her eyes are black hollows leaking something thick and red. She opens her mouth. Silence. No scream, no whisper, just emptiness pouring out. Daniel's breath fogs in sharp bursts. You're not her, he says, though doubt creeps in like cold water through cracked glass. The child lifts one hand and points past him. Slowly. Deliberately. He doesn't want to turn around. Every nerve in his body begs him not to. This is a mistake. He knows it. But he turns. The lake. Toluca Lake stretches behind him, its surface unnaturally still. And standing at the edge of the dock is a woman. Long coat. Dark hair pulled back. She shouldn't be here. She died before the fire. Before everything. Yet she stands there untouched by rust and ash, staring directly at him as if she's been waiting for years. Daniel, she calls softly. The voice is the same, warm, achingly familiar. His wife. But here's the thing, when she smiles, it doesn't reach her eyes, and the siren begins to scream again. The siren drills through Daniel's skull as the sky peels open above Silent Hill. Rust flakes drift down like diseased snow. His wife stands at the edge of Toluca Lake, untouched by the decay, her coat moving in a wind he can't feel. For a second, just one, he forgets the fire, forgets the hospital corridor, forgets holding her hand when the machines went flat. Anna? His voice cracks on her name. She smiles gently. You shouldn't have come alone. The words hit wrong. Alone? The child behind him lets out a soft giggle. Daniel spins back. The burned girl is gone. Only barbed wire twitching across the pavement like living veins. His pulse slams in his ears. When he turns again, Anna is closer. No footsteps, no sound, just closer. I got the drawing, he says, swallowing hard. If this is some trick. Do you really think I joke about her? Anna steps onto the dock, wood creaking beneath her boots. The lake is too still, no ripples, no reflection, not even of her. Daniel notices that last detail and his stomach drops. I buried you, he whispers. You buried a body, she replies softly. Not the truth. The fog shifts, thickening around them. For a heartbeat, the world goes quiet. No siren, no metal groan, just her eyes locked on his. And he sees it now, that subtle wrongness, not in her face, in her expression. Anna used to look at him with warmth, even on their worst days. This look is searching, measuring. You remember that night? She asks. The question punches the air from his lungs, flames licking up the nursery walls. Smoke choking the ceiling. Emily screaming upstairs. Daniel frozen at the bottom of the staircase, heat blistering his skin. He shakes his head violently. Stop! You hesitated. I didn't! You did! Her voice sharpens, slicing through the fog. You stood there while she called for you. The lake shudders. Daniel staggers back, boots slipping on damp wood. That's not how it happened. But the memory flickers. Just for a second. The way fear locked his legs. The way he thought, I can't reach her in time. The way he almost turned toward the door instead. I went back, he insists. I went back for her. And what did you find? Anna steps closer. Too close. Her skin looks pale now. Translucent. Beneath it, something dark pulses. Silence. He found an empty room. Windows blown out. Curtains burning. No body. No Emily. The town told him she'd been consumed. No remains recovered. Case closed. Anna tilts her head. What if she wasn't taken by fire? The siren dies abruptly. Total silence crashes down, so heavy it feels physical. Daniel's breath sounds too loud. The dock beneath his feet begins to rot in fast motion. Wood blackening, splitting. From the lake, bubbles rise. Slow at first, then violently. Shapes move beneath the surface. I tried to protect her, Daniel whispers, but it sounds like he's begging himself. From what? Anna asks. The water erupts. Pale arms burst upward, dozens of them, reaching, grasping. Their skin blistered and peeling, mouths open in soundless screams. They claw at the dock, dragging themselves halfway out of the lake. The smell hits him burned flesh mixed with stagnant water. Daniel stumbles back as one hand wraps around his ankle. Ice cold, vice tight. He kicks free, heart exploding in his chest. Anna doesn't move. You need to remember, she says calmly, while chaos climbs from the water behind her. That's the only way she survives. Survives? His mind fractures around the word. Hope, sharp and dangerous. Emily's alive? Anna's face flickers. Just for a blink. Skin cracking, revealing something darker beneath raw, charred bone. Then it smooths again. Beautiful, untouched. She's waiting, Anna whispers. But not for the father who ran. Rage ignites through his fear. I didn't run. The dock snaps in half. Daniel plunges into the freezing lake. Water closes over his head, black and suffocating. Hands wrap around his arms, his legs dragging him deeper. He thrashes, lungs burning. Through the murk, he sees a small figure standing on the lakebed, untouched by the current. Emily, whole, dry, watching him sink. Her lips move. Why didn't you come sooner? His chest convulses. Water floods in. Everything goes dark. He jolts awake on the shoreline, coughing violently. The lake is calm again. No arms, no dock, no Anna, just fog. And in the wet sand beside him, drawn with a child's finger, find me before he does. Daniel's blood runs cold. He's not the only one searching for Emily. The words in the sand don't wash away. Fog curls over them, tries to swallow them, but they stay carved deep. Find me before he does. Daniel's hands tremble as he traces the letters. A child's handwriting. Emily always curved her F's too wide. Hope flickers again, dangerous and bright. If someone else is searching for her, then she's real, alive. Somewhere in this nightmare. A church bell tolls in the distance. Not broken, not rusted. Clear, alive. Daniel stands slowly, clothes still soaked from a lake that now looks perfectly undisturbed. No dock, no footprints but his own. The town rearranges itself again, streets bending subtly toward the sound. He doesn't remember Silent Hill having a church near the water. But the bell rings a second time, heavy and deliberate, calling him. He follows. The fog thins just enough to reveal stained glass ahead, glowing faintly red from within. The doors of the church hang open. Inside, candles burn in neat rows along the aisle, their flames steady despite the absence of air. The smell hits him first, melted wax and something metallic underneath. Blood. Fresh. At the altar stands a man in a dark suit, back turned. Tall. Still. Hands folded behind him as if in prayer. "You're late," the man says calmly. Daniel freezes at the voice. Smooth. Controlled. Familiar in a way he can't place. "Who are you?" The man turns slowly. His face is unscarred. Clean. Almost kind. But his eyes empty gray like smoke trapped behind glass. "I was hoping you'd remember on your own." Rage simmers beneath Daniel's confusion. The message in the sand. "That was you?" In a manner of speaking. The man gestures to the pews. Daniel's breath catches. Figures sit slumped along both sides of the aisle. Dozens of them. Burned. Twisted. Their heads bowed as if in silent worship. Children among them. Small frames in charred dresses and melted shoes. "This town preserves truth," the man continues softly. "It peels back the lies people tell themselves." Daniel steps backward. "I didn't lie." "No." The man tilts his head slightly. "You told the police the wiring was faulty. An accident. You told your wife you checked the smoke detectors that week." A pause. "Had you?" Daniel's mouth goes dry. He remembers meaning to. He remembers Emily tugging at his sleeve that afternoon, asking him to come see the drawing she made. He told her later. After dinner. After the game. After one more beer. "You're twisting it," Daniel growls, fists clenching. "Fires happen." "Yes," the man agrees gently, "but guilt happens too." The candles flicker violently. The burned figures in the pews lift their heads in unison, hollow eyes locking onto Daniel. The air thickens, pressing against his lungs. He shakes his head, backing toward the exit. "Where's my daughter?" The man steps down from the altar. Each footstep echoes unnaturally loud. "Safe. For now." "For now?" Panic slices through him. "You weren't the only one who hesitated that night." The words strike like a physical blow. Daniel stares. "What are you talking about?" The church doors slam shut behind him. Metal shrieks as chains snake across the wood, sealing them tight. The stained glass windows darken, images of saints warping into screaming faces. The man's calm expression finally cracks, just slightly, revealing something colder underneath. "Your wife called someone before she ran upstairs," he says. "Do you remember that?" Memory flickers. Anna in the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear. Arguing in hush, urgent tones. Daniel had tuned it out. He always tuned it out. "Who did she call?" Daniel whispers. The man smiles faintly. "Me!" The floor beneath Daniel's feet softens, turning to ash. He stumbles as heat surges upward through his boots. Flames crawl along the pews, but the burned bodies do not move. They simply watch. "You built the fire long before the match was struck," the man continues, voice rising over the growing roar. "Neglect, distance, silence, silent. Hill feeds on those things." Daniel lunges forward, grabbing the man by the collar. His hands pass straight through him. Illusion. The man now stands behind him. "Find her," he whispers into Daniel's ear. "Before the town decides she belongs here." The flames explode upward. Daniel screams as the fire consumes the church. And then? Darkness. He's outside again, on his knees in the street. The church gone. Only an empty lot choked with rusted swings and a broken playground sign swaying gently. Carved into the metal slide in jagged letters, H.E. Remembers now. Daniel's heart pounds violently. Because he does. But not everything. And whatever Anna called that night is still here, watching. The playground creaks even though there's no wind. Chains sway. Rust flakes drift down like dying embers. Daniel stares at the carved words on the slide. H.E. Remembers now. His reflection stares back at him in the warped metal, fractured into pieces. For a second, he sees himself as the town must see him. Not grieving, not broken, guilty. A ball rolls across the cracked pavement. Bright red, scorched on one side. Daniel's breath catches. Emily's favorite. He'd promised to fix the torn seam weeks before the fire. He never did. The ball stops at his feet as if placed there. Slowly, he bends to pick it up. It's warm. Too warm. Like it's been sitting near flames. "Daddy?" The voice comes from the swings. He turns slowly. Emily sits on the middle swing, dress unburned now, hair brushed neatly over her shoulders. She looks whole. Alive. Her small fingers grip the chains gently, pushing herself back and forth with lazy rhythm. The sight hits him harder than any monster could. His knees almost give out. "M?" The name barely forms. She smiles. Soft, familiar. "You found me." Tears blur his vision. He takes a careful step forward, afraid she'll vanish. Are you real?" Her swing slows. "You didn't come when I called." The words slice clean. I tried, he whispers, choking. The smoke was. I couldn't see. You were scared. I was your father. The outburst surprises even him. I would never leave you. Emily tilts her head, the way Anna did on the dock, the way the burned child did in the alley. Pattern. Same gesture, same stillness. Then why did you lock the door? The world tilts. Daniel blinks. What? You locked it, she repeats quietly, so the fire wouldn't spread. Memory detonates in his skull. That night, the argument downstairs. Anna shouting about the insurance money, about the debt swallowing them whole. Daniel storming into the hallway, smelling smoke, seeing flames lick under Emily's bedroom door, acting on instinct. Twisting the key from the outside to contain it, to stop it from moving through the house. Just for a minute, just until he grabbed the extinguisher. The extinguisher he couldn't find. His stomach folds in on itself. No, he breathes. No, I unlocked it. I came back. You hesitated, Emily says again. But now her voice overlaps with Anna's, with the man from the church, with the man from the church, all layered together. You thought about letting it burn. The swings stop moving. Silence crashes down. Daniel stumbles backward, shaking his head violently. I didn't mean. I was panicking. I was trying to fix it. The ground beneath the playground splits open, glowing red beneath the cracks. Heat blasts upward, blistering the paint off the jungle gym. Emily stands from the swing, untouched by the rising flames. You said everything would be okay, she whispers. Her skin begins to blister. Daniel lunges forward, but barbed wire erupts from the earth again, coiling around his legs, dragging him to his knees. He screams as metal bites into flesh. I'm sorry, he shouts. I'm sorry. Emily's face flickers burned, then whole, then charred bone beneath thin skin. Sorry doesn't open locked doors. The playground melts away. Daniel finds himself back inside his house. Whole, intact, smoke creeping along the ceiling exactly as it did that night. The argument echoes from the kitchen, Anna's voice sharp, desperate. You said you'd handle it. I am handling it, his own voice answers from memory. Upstairs, coughing, a child calling his name. Present Daniel stands frozen at the bottom of the stairs, watching his past self hesitate in the hallway, watching him glance toward the front door, toward escape. I didn't run, Daniel whispers, but he watches himself take one step back. Just one. The tall man from the church stands beside him now, observing like a patient teacher. Truth is a cruel thing, he murmurs. Why are you doing this? Daniel demands. The man's gray eyes finally darken. Because she isn't dead. Daniel's heart slams painfully against his ribs. What? She got out, the man says calmly. After you. The house begins to burn around them. You locked the door, he continues, but she climbed from the window. Daniel's mind fractures. That's impossible. The fire. Someone was waiting outside. The ceiling collapses in sparks and smoke. Daniel grabs the man's coat. Who? The man leans close, voice almost gentle. The one Anna called. Everything explodes into white heat, and Daniel is thrown onto cold pavement outside the house that no longer exists. In the distance, beyond the fog, he sees headlights, a car idling, waiting. Headlights cut through the fog like twin blades. The engine hums low, patient, waiting. Daniel pushes himself up from the pavement, lungs dragging in cold air that tastes like ash and gasoline. The house behind him is gone again, just an empty lot of cracked foundation and blackened earth. But the car is real, idling at the curb where his driveway used to be. The driver's door creaks open. A woman steps out first. Anna, not burned, not flickering, solid. Her heels click softly against the road as she walks around the hood. She looks tired, older than he remembers, but alive, completely alive. Daniel's heart stutters. You died. Anna studies him with something like pity. That's what you needed to believe. The passenger door opens. A small figure climbs out slowly, clutching a worn red ball under one arm. Emily, whole, breathing, watching him with wide, uncertain eyes. Time fractures. Daniel takes one shaky step forward. Emily, his voice is barely a sound. Hope surges so violently it almost knocks him down. She's here. She's real. She survived. But she doesn't run to him. She stays close to Anna. Don't, Anna says softly as Daniel moves again. Not angry, not afraid, just firm. His chest tightens. You said she died. The police? The hospital, they told me. You were unconscious for 3 days, Anna interrupts. Smoke inhalation. You kept repeating that she was gone, that you'd locked the door, that it was too late. Her voice trembles slightly now. When Emily made it outside, a neighbor pulled her away before the fire trucks came. I called someone to help us leave before you woke up. The man, Daniel whispers. Anna nods once. My brother. Memory shifts violently into place. A shadow by the curve that night. A car engine running. Daniel, too, focused on smoke and sirens to notice. You thought I blamed you, Anna says. And I did, for a while. But you were drowning in guilt already. When you woke up and kept saying she didn't make it, she swallows hard. I let you believe it. The words hit harder than any monster. You let me think my daughter was dead? His voice cracks between rage and devastation. You needed to face what you almost did, Anna fires back, emotion finally breaking through. You locked that door, Daniel. You chose fear for 1 second over her. I saw it in your eyes before you ran back upstairs. And if you never confronted that, if you buried it like everything else, her voice softens. You would have destroyed yourself. Or us. Daniel looks at Emily. She grips the ball tighter. Mom said you were sick, she says quietly, that you needed to remember how to be brave again. The fog begins to thin around them. The rust fades slightly from the street. Silent Hill feels less like a wound and more like a mirror. You sent the drawing, he says. Emily nods. And the message in the sand? Anna glances toward the lake behind him. Not all of this is us. The engine of the car suddenly revs on its own. Daniel turns slowly. The tall man stands beside the driver's seat now, gray eyes fixed on him. You found them, he says calmly, but the town hasn't decided yet. Emily steps back instinctively. Fear returns, sharp and electric. What do you want? Daniel demands. The man's gaze doesn't waver. Choice. The pavement cracks again, but this time not with fire, with darkness. A chasm splits the street between Daniel and the car, widening by the second. On one side, his wife and daughter. On the other, the weight of everything he's done. You can cross, the man says softly, but only if you stop lying. Daniel's mind races, lying, to himself, to them. He looks at Anna, at Emily, and finally he says it. I was scared. The ground trembles. I locked the door because I panicked. Because for 1 second I wanted the fire contained more than I wanted to face it. His voice breaks completely now. I almost let my daughter die. Silence. The chasm stops widening. Emily's eyes fill with tears, but she doesn't disappear. The tall man watches closely. And I will spend the rest of my life proving that 1 second does not define me. Daniel finishes, voice raw but steady. The fog pulls back another inch. The man's expression shifts, just slightly. Not anger, not satisfaction, approval. But the street hasn't fully sealed, and something far deeper than guilt is still moving beneath Silent Hill. The town isn't done with him yet. The crack in the street seals with a sound like bone knitting back together. Fog recoils another step. For a fragile second, Daniel thinks it's over. He thinks confession is enough. Then the siren starts again. Not distant, not rising from the sky. From beneath his feet, the pavement bulges, splits. Black tendrils snake upward, wrapping around his ankles before he can move. Daniel crashes to his knees as the ground liquefies into tar-like darkness. Across the street, Anna grabs Emily, pulling her back toward the car. Daniel, she screams. The tall man doesn't move. You told the truth, he says evenly. But truth has weight. The street collapses entirely. Daniel is dragged down into suffocating dark. He slams onto cold metal flooring. The air smells of rust and antiseptic. Fluorescent lights flicker overhead, buzzing like dying insects. He's inside a hospital corridor peeling paint, gurneys overturned, walls stained brown. Silent Hill's other face. A monitor beeps somewhere in the distance. Slow. Steady. Daniel stumbles forward. Tendrils gone now, but his legs tremble violently. Doors line both sides of the hallway, each marked with a room number he recognizes. The number from the hospital wing he woke up in after the fire. The beeping grows louder. Heartbeat rhythm. Short. Long. Short. Long. He pushes open the door. Inside himself. Past Daniel lies in the hospital bed, oxygen mask strapped to his face, skin gray with smoke damage. Machines blink steadily. And beside the bed sits Anna, exhausted, eyes hollow from sleepless nights. Emily, smaller than, sits curled in a chair holding that red ball. Alive. Daniel steps closer, invisible to them. He watches his unconscious self thrash weakly, whispering through the mask. She's gone. I locked it. She's gone. Anna's face crumples every time he says it. You weren't ready to hear she survived, the tall man's voice echoes from the doorway behind him. You needed punishment, so your mind built one. Daniel turns slowly. This town isn't doing this to me. No, the man replies. You are. The fluorescent lights burst one by one down the corridor. Darkness creeps in from the corners of the room. You've confessed fear, the man continues, stepping inside, but you still believe you deserve to lose them. The hospital bed begins to rust. Sheets stain red. Past Daniel's body twists unnaturally, bones snapping beneath skin. That's not true, Daniel growls, backing away. Isn't it? The man asks calmly. You never went looking for them after you woke. You accepted her death. You let grief become your identity. The memory stings because it's true, he had asked once, weakly, and when Anna said Emily didn't make it, he broke. He didn't fight, didn't question. He retreated into guilt like it was safer than hope. I thought I killed her, Daniel whispers. And if she had died, the man presses, voice sharper now, would you have forgiven yourself? Silence. The room melts into decay. Hospital walls peel away to reveal endless darkness beyond. Daniel's chest tightens painfully. No, he admits. The word echoes. The monstrous version of himself on the bed sits upright suddenly, head snapping toward him, eyes black, skin charred, oxygen mask fused into melted flesh. You don't deserve her, it rasps. It lunges. Daniel barely dodges as the creature crashes to the floor, crawling toward him with broken limbs snapping back into place, each movement wet. Wrong. Fight it! Anna's voice echoes faintly from somewhere far above. Emily's voice follows. Be brave again! The creature grabs Daniel's collar, slamming him into the wall. You locked the door, it snarls in his own voice. Yes, Daniel roars back, grabbing the thing's burned face. I locked it. I was weak, but I went back. The creature hesitates. I ran into that fire, Daniel shouts, tears mixing with sweat. I burned my hands trying to open it again. I would have died in there. The monster's grip falters. You don't get to erase that, Daniel growls. I made a terrible choice for 1 second, but I chose her the next. The corridor trembles violently. The creature begins to crack, splitting along glowing seams. I am not that 1 second, Daniel screams. The monster shatters into ash. Silence crashes down. The hospital dissolves around him. Daniel stands alone in soft morning light. The fog is thinning faster now. But in the distance, beyond the lake, something massive shifts beneath the surface. And the tall man's voice drips one last time through the air. One truth remains. Daniel's heart pounds. Because he knows. He still hasn't asked why Anna lied. Morning light stretches across Toluca Lake, pale and almost gentle. The fog is no longer choking the town. It's retreating, slow and reluctant, like a living thing denied its meal. Daniel stands at the water's edge, chest rising hard, the echo of his own scream still vibrating in his bones. One truth remains. The words linger. Behind him, footsteps approach softly. Anna stops a few feet away. Emily stands beside her, clutching the red ball, eyes clearer now. Real, solid, not flickering between forms. Daniel turns to them, fear and love colliding in his chest. Why did you lie? He asks quietly. Anna doesn't look away this time. Because you would have come looking. That's the point, he says, voice breaking. I should have. She shakes her head slowly. No, you would have come here. Daniel glances at the town, the rusted buildings, the shifting shadows beneath broken windows, the thing beneath the lake that just moved again. This place feeds on guilt, Anna continues. My brother grew up studying it. The cult, the disappearances, the way people see what they fear most. She steps closer. When you woke up and kept saying Emily was gone, he told me something. Daniel braces himself. He said if you believed she survived while still blaming yourself, Silent Hill would pull you back. It would make you finish punishing yourself. Emily's small hand slips into Anna's. So you let me believe she was dead? Daniel whispers. Anna's eyes fill with tears. I chose the version that kept you alive. The lake suddenly ripples. Deep, violent. The massive shape beneath the surface rises just enough to distort the water above it. Not a creature. Not exactly. More like a silhouette of everything Daniel feared. Towering, faceless, built from smoke and memory. The tall man stands at the shoreline now, coat unmoving in the breeze. Final choice, he says calmly. The ground trembles. You can walk away with them, he continues, gesturing toward Anna and Emily. But the town will always exist inside you. Daniel swallows. Or, the man adds, you can stay. Finish confronting every shadow. Make sure it never calls you back. Anna steps forward urgently. Daniel, no, you don't owe this place anything. But he looks at Emily, at the way she watches him, not afraid, just waiting. Being brave isn't about running into fire, he says slowly. It's about not letting fear make the next choice. The shape beneath the lake begins to rise higher, water cascading off its massive form. The air vibrates with pressure. Daniel steps toward it. Anna grabs his arm. You don't have to prove anything. He gently pulls free. I'm not proving it to the town. He kneels in front of Emily, placing his burned hands over hers. I'm proving it to me. Her small fingers squeeze back. I'll always choose you, he whispers. Then he stands and walks toward the water. The tall man watches carefully. You understand this isn't about monsters. Daniel nods once. It never was. He steps into the lake. Cold engulfs him instantly, but he doesn't fight it. He keeps walking as the dark shape looms above. Memories surge. Fear, hesitation, smoke. That single second of weakness. But they don't crush him this time. They pass through him. I was afraid, he says into the rising water, but I am not that fear. The towering silhouette fractures. Light cuts through the lake from beneath, shattering the darkness into dissolving mist. The pressure vanishes. The water clears. Daniel stands alone in shallow ripples. The town is quiet. No siren, no rust, no shifting walls. When he turns back toward the shore, Anna and Emily are there. No car, no fog, just them. He walks out of the lake slowly, water dripping from his clothes. Emily runs to him this time. No hesitation. She wraps her arms around his waist. And he holds her. Tight. Anna steps in beside them, resting her forehead against his. No more distance. No more unspoken blame. Silent Hill stands silent behind them. Not destroyed. Not erased. Just smaller. As they begin walking down the road together, the town sign comes into view once more. The carved word beneath Welcome to Silent Hill has changed. No longer LIAR. Now it reads, Remember, and Daniel does, but he keeps walking anyway. Before we begin, a quick note for transparency. The analytical structure guiding this breakdown draws from a professional framework outlined in the Cinematic Analysis Training Data and the Human Voice Writing Guide, which shape the depth, rhythm, and tone of this series. Now let's step into the fog. Christophe Gans doesn't just make horror films, he builds cathedrals to them. When he directed Silent Hill in 2006, he treated the Konami video game not as disposable genre material, but as sacred text, studying its iconography, its psychological undertones, its industrial decay. 2 decades later, with Return to Silent Hill 2026, Gans comes back not for nostalgia, but for redemption. Sequels rarely carry this kind of weight. This one does. Because this isn't just another adaptation. It's a return by a filmmaker who never really left the nightmare. Gans' career has always orbited stylized darkness. From Brotherhood of the Wolf to the original Silent Hill, his films are drenched in operatic excess Baroque visuals, mythic symbolism, beauty laced with brutality. He's never been a minimalist. He leans into atmosphere the way some directors lean into dialogue. That instinct matters here. Because Return to Silent Hill isn't just continuing a franchise, it's attempting to course-correct it after 2012's critically panned Revelation. And Gans knows exactly what went wrong, spectacle without soul. This new installment draws heavily from Silent Hill 2, widely considered the crown jewel of the game series. That choice alone signals intent. Silent Hill 2 isn't about cult conspiracies or apocalyptic lore, it's about guilt, about grief. About a man haunted not by monsters, but by his own actions. That psychological core is what Gans reportedly wanted to capture. A horror film where the real terror isn't what stalks you in the fog, but what lives inside you. And if he pulls it off, it shifts the franchise from creature feature territory into something closer to tragic gothic drama. Here's the key difference this time around: fidelity to emotional truth rather than plot mechanics. The 2006 film was visually faithful but narratively reimagined. Return to Silent Hill aims for something more intimate. Gans has spoken about staying closer to the structure of the game, particularly its tragic love story between James and Mary. That's a risky move in Hollywood, where game adaptations often fear subtlety. But it's also the right one, because Silent Hill 2 endures not because of Pyramid Head, but because of what Pyramid Head represents. And let's talk about that iconography for a moment. Pyramid Head isn't just a monster, he's punishment made flesh, a manifestation of repression and guilt. If Gans understands this, and history suggests he does, then the creature design won't just shock, it will mean something. Horror that functions metaphorically lingers longer than horror built on jump scares. That's the difference between being startled and being disturbed. Production-wise, the film is backed by Davis Films and co-produced with international partners, reflecting the franchise's global fanbase. That matters, because Silent Hill has always had a cross-cultural identity. Japanese psychological horror filtered through Western cinematic language. Gans stands uniquely positioned to bridge that divide. He reveres the source material, but he also understands the grammar of European horror cinema. Slow burns, moral rot, tragic inevitability. Expect less frantic editing, more dread, more stillness. The casting of Jeremy Irvine as James Sunderland hints at another deliberate shift. Irvine brings vulnerability. He doesn't carry blockbuster bravado, he carries emotional fragility. That's essential. James isn't an action hero. He's a man unraveling. The performance needs restraint, not swagger. Alongside him, Hannah Emily Anderson steps into the dual role inspired by Mary and Maria, a choice that, if handled correctly, becomes the film's emotional axis. Duality is baked into Silent Hill 2's DNA. Love and resentment, memory and distortion, salvation and damnation. What makes this project fascinating isn't just its premise, its timing. Video game adaptations are finally earning respect. The Last of Us proved audiences will embrace faithful, emotionally grounded storytelling. Arcane demonstrated that game worlds can sustain thematic depth. Return to Silent Hill arrives in that wake. The bar is higher now. Atmosphere alone won't cut it. Character has to carry the weight. And that's where Gans' personal investment becomes crucial. He's described his connection to Silent Hill as almost spiritual. He sees the town as a mythic space, a purgatory where characters confront themselves. That's not marketing language, that's auteur language. Whether the industry labels him as such or not, Gans approaches horror like a painter obsessed with recurring imagery. Rust, ash, fog, barbed wire. These aren't set decorations. They're psychological textures. But ambition is only half the equation. Vision must meet execution. The original film struggled with pacing and exposition. Will this sequel trust silence more? Will it allow ambiguity to breathe? Psychological horror requires patience. It demands confidence that audiences will lean in rather than check out. In an era of algorithm-driven storytelling, that's a gamble. And yet, that gamble is exactly why this project feels compelling. Because Return to Silent Hill isn't chasing trends. It's chasing absolution. For the director, for the franchise, for fans who felt the series lost its way. The creative genesis here isn't corporate expansion, it's reclamation. The fog is rolling back in. But this time, the question isn't whether the monsters will return. It's whether the man behind the camera can confront them properly. And that confrontation begins not with special effects or creature design, but with the script itself. Because even the most haunting vision collapses without a strong narrative spine. So how was this story reshaped from one of gaming's most revered psychological tales into a modern cinematic screenplay? That's where we go next. The most dangerous thing about adapting Silent Hill 2 isn't the monsters, it's the silence. The game thrives on negative space-long corridors where nothing happens except your own thoughts getting louder. Translating that into a screenplay is like trying to film grief without dialogue, and that's exactly the tightrope Return to Silent Hill had to walk from the moment the first draft was typed. Christophe Gans collaborated with screenwriter Sandra Vo-NH, shaping a script that reportedly cleaves closer to the emotional architecture of the 2001 game than previous adaptations ever dared. That matters. The original Silent Hill film restructured its source material heavily, even gender-swapping the protagonist to recalibrate tone. This time, the spine remains intact. James Sunderland receives a letter from his dead wife, summoning him back to the haunted town where their memories refuse to stay buried. It's simple, almost deceptively so, but beneath that simplicity lies a psychological labyrinth. Here's the screenwriting challenge. In the game, players control James. They project onto him. They participate in his denial. A film removes that interactivity. Now James must be observed rather than inhabited. That means the script has to externalize inner conflict without resorting to clunky exposition. No one wants a protagonist explaining his trauma in neat monologues. The writing needs restraint suggestion over declaration. Early reports suggest the screenplay leans into visual storytelling rather than dialogue-heavy confession. That's a smart pivot. Silent Hill 2 was never about plot twists, it was about realization. The horror grows not from surprise, but from dawning awareness. Structurally, this favors a slow-burn, three-act approach. Act 1, the invitation back to town and initial exploration. Act 2, escalating encounters with manifestations of guilt, including Maria, a distorted echo of Mary. Act 3, revelation and reckoning. Classical structure, psychological payload. But here's where adaptation becomes art instead of transcription. The game features multiple endings based on player behavior. A film doesn't have that luxury. It must choose. That decision alone defines its thesis. Does James seek redemption? Does he succumb to despair? Or does the story linger in ambiguity? Gans reportedly wanted to preserve the tragic romantic core, which suggests the screenplay prioritizes emotional closure over franchise continuation. Bold choice, especially in a cinematic landscape obsessed with sequels and universe building. Dialogue tone becomes critical here. The 2006 film occasionally tipped into heavy exposition, explaining lore instead of letting dread breathe. If this script learned from that misstep, expect quieter exchanges, fragmented conversations, lines that hang in the air unanswered. Think of how The Babadook used domestic arguments to mask deeper trauma, or how Hereditary weaponized dinner table silence. Horror that speaks softly often hits hardest. And then there's Maria. On the page, she's not merely a supporting character, she's thematic dynamite. She embodies temptation, denial, fantasy. Writing her requires precision. Too overtly seductive and she becomes cliché. Too subtle, and the metaphor collapses. The screenplay reportedly deepens her dialogue, giving her agency rather than presenting her as an abstract symbol. That's crucial, because if she feels real, the tragedy feels earned. Another narrative adjustment likely involves pacing for modern audiences. Video games allow extended exploration. Films demand momentum. That doesn't mean constant action. It means purposeful progression. Scenes must build tension through layering rather than wandering. Expect carefully placed creature encounters. Pyramid Head appearing not as a random threat, but as escalation. In the game, his presence signals punishment drawing closer. The script must replicate that rhythm cinematically, almost like a Greek tragedy where fate keeps stepping into frame. There's also the matter of lore. The broader Silent Hill mythology, cults, alternate dimensions, apocalyptic theology can easily overwhelm James's intimate story. Smart screenwriting trims mythology down to what serves character. If the town becomes too explained, it stops being unsettling. Mystery is oxygen for psychological horror. Overexposure suffocates it. One intriguing element is how the screenplay handles memory. In the game, flashbacks are fragmented, often unreliable. A film can manipulate this through editing, nonlinear glimpses, recurring imagery, repeated lines that shift meaning. If the script embraces this, it creates a layered narrative where revelation isn't delivered. It's assembled by the audience. That kind of writing respects viewers. It assumes intelligence, and modern horror audiences appreciate that trust. Tone-wise, the screenplay appears committed to melancholy rather than shock. That's a subtle but significant shift from mainstream horror trends dominated by jump scares and kinetic pacing. Melancholy lingers. It stains scenes with emotional residue. When James walks through fog, the atmosphere shouldn't just feel eerie. It should feel heavy. Regret made weather. Of course, ambition invites risk. Psychological horror can drift into vagueness if not grounded. The script must balance abstraction with clarity. James's arc needs coherence even if details remain mysterious. Otherwise, audiences detach. The best adaptations understand that confusion is different from intrigue. One alienates, the other invites deeper engagement. Here's the quiet gamble embedded in this screenplay. It treats horror as tragedy first, spectacle second. That reverses typical genre priorities. It's closer in spirit to Don't Look Now than to The Conjuring. And if it works, Return to Silent Hill won't just be another video game movie. It'll be a character study disguised as a nightmare. But words on a page are only potential energy. A script can be elegant, haunting, structurally sound, and still fall apart if the wrong faces deliver it. Casting determines whether subtext breathes or suffocates, whether vulnerability feels authentic or performed. So the next question becomes unavoidable. Who did they trust to carry this weight of guilt, grief, and psychological fragmentation on screen? Because in a story this intimate, the right casting isn't just important, it's everything. Casting Return to Silent Hill was never about star power. It was about fragility. Because James Sunderland isn't a hero you cheer for, he's a man you slowly understand. That's a much harder sell. When Jeremy Irvine was announced in the role, reactions were mixed. He isn't a household name. He doesn't carry franchise baggage. And that's precisely why the choice feels deliberate. Irvine first broke through in Spielberg's Warhorse, playing innocents under siege. Since then, his career has zigzagged between period dramas and indie projects, often portraying characters defined by quiet turmoil rather than dominance. That matters here. James requires restraint. He's not quippy. He's not physically imposing. He's emotionally evasive. Casting someone too charismatic would tilt the story toward conventional thriller territory. Irvine's softer screen presence allows guilt to register in micro-expressions. Hesitation in the eyes, tension in the jaw, the way he holds silence a beat too long. And here's the thing about James. He spends most of the story reacting, wandering, searching. If the actor can't make stillness compelling, the film collapses. Irvine's strength lies in internalization. He doesn't oversell emotion. He lets it simmer. That's a gamble, yes, but psychological horror thrives on simmering performances. Think of Casey Affleck in Manchester by the Sea. Emotion buried so deep it leaks sideways. If Irvine taps into that register, James becomes tragic rather than frustrating. Opposite him, Hannah Emily Anderson steps into perhaps the most delicate dual role in horror adaptation. Mary and Maria. One represents memory, the other distortion. The casting choice here isn't just practical, it's thematic. In the game, the same face embodies two opposing emotional forces. On film, that requires an actress capable of subtle differentiation without caricature. Anderson has a background in thriller and genre work, including Jigsaw, where she balanced vulnerability with menace. That duality is essential. Mary needs to feel grounded, human, aching. Maria, by contrast, carries a slightly heightened presence, seductive but unsettling, familiar yet off. The script reportedly leans into this contrast through performance rather than heavy visual trickery. That's smart, because if the difference feels purely cosmetic, the metaphor weakens. The audience needs to sense that something is wrong before they consciously articulate it. Chemistry tests between Irvine and Anderson would have been crucial. Their dynamic anchors the entire narrative. Without believable intimacy, without the sense that these two once shared something real, the emotional reveal in the third act loses impact. Tragedy only works if love feels authentic first, and that authenticity can't be faked with lighting or score. It has to flicker between actors. Beyond the leads, casting reportedly prioritizes performers who don't overshadow the central arc. Silent Hill 2 is a lonely story. Supporting characters appear like fractured mirrors. Angela, Eddie, figures wrestling their own psychological torment. If the adaptation includes them faithfully, casting must avoid scene-stealing theatrics. These characters aren't comic relief or exposition machines. They are cautionary tales. Each one reflects a different response to trauma. The wrong casting could turn them into archetypes instead of individuals. One fascinating aspect of this casting approach is its resistance to celebrity distraction. In an era where horror increasingly attracts A-list talent, Return to Silent Hill opts for grounded performers. That keeps immersion intact. You're not watching a star in fog, you're watching a man unravel. That subtle distinction changes the entire viewing experience. There's also the question of physicality. Pyramid Head may be the franchise's most iconic figure, but casting the performer inside that towering helmet matters. Creature acting requires discipline, slow, deliberate movement, controlled menace. Doug Jones built a career on that craft, turning monsters into expressive entities. Whoever inhabits Pyramid Head here must embody inevitability rather than aggression. The character shouldn't feel like he's chasing James. He should feel like he's waiting for him. And that speaks to the broader casting philosophy, alignment over flash. The actors need to disappear into atmosphere rather than punch through it. Horror is unforgiving to miscasting. One false note, one exaggerated delivery, and tension dissolves. Subtlety is survival. But casting isn't just about individual performance, it's about constellation, how faces interact, how energies clash or harmonize. The best horror ensembles operate like chamber orchestras, no one overpowering the melody, each instrument entering precisely when needed. If Gans assembled the right constellation here, the performances won't announce themselves as great acting. They'll feel inevitable, organic, as though these characters could only ever be played by these people. Of course, selection is just the beginning. The real test happens under lights, in costume, inside meticulously constructed decay. That's where preparation meets pressure. where actors must translate theory into lived emotion. And that's where we turn next into the performances themselves. Because casting choices become meaningful only when examined scene by scene, breath by breath, silence by silence. This story doesn't hinge on spectacle. It hinges on whether you believe the man walking through the fog deserves to be there. The moment that defines Jeremy Irvine's James Sunderland doesn't arrive with a scream. It arrives with hesitation. A pause before opening a door. A breath held just a second too long. That's the performance's foundation restraint stretched until it frays. James is one of horror's most misunderstood protagonists. On paper, he risks appearing passive, even dull. He wanders, he reacts, he absorbs. But that's surface reading. Underneath, he's actively suppressing truth. Irvine's job isn't to play fear, it's to play denial. And those are wildly different energies. Fear spikes outward. Denial folds inward. Watch his posture in early scenes. Shoulders slightly rounded, gaze unfocused, as if he's physically avoiding confrontation with the environment. The town isn't just oppressive. He's complicit in its silence. Here's what makes this performance compelling. Irvine underplays almost everything. When lesser actors approach trauma, they signal it. Trembling voices, tearful monologues. Irvine goes the opposite direction. His face often settles into blankness, not emptiness, but suppression. The kind of emotional vacuum that feels intentional. That choice aligns perfectly with the character's psychology. James isn't processing grief, he's running from it. And the performance mirrors that evasion beat for beat. There's a particular power in stillness. In horror, stillness can be louder than panic. When Pyramid Head first appears in the distance, massive, deliberate, unhurried, Irvine doesn't explode into hysteria. He watches, frozen. The terror registers not as chaos, but as recognition. That subtle shift in the eyes, that flicker of something unspoken, it tells you James knows more than he's admitting. And that layered awareness elevates the encounter from monster movie spectacle into psychological reckoning. But the true emotional axis of the film lives in Irvine's scenes opposite Hannah Emily Anderson. As Mary, Anderson plays fragility without sentimentality. Her portrayal avoids saintly idealization. She's tender, yes, but also weary, human. In flashbacks or fragmented memories, she feels tangible enough that losing her hurts. That authenticity is essential. If Mary feels like a symbol instead of a person, the entire story collapses. And then there's Maria. Anderson shifts her physicality almost imperceptibly. A different cadence in speech. A looser posture. A gaze that lingers half a second too long. Maria isn't exaggerated. She's unsettling because she feels like Mary filtered through James's fantasy warmer, more attentive, less complicated. That distinction is razor thin. Anderson navigates it without sliding into parody. You sense intention in every glance. Seduction, yes, but tinged with something hollow. The chemistry between Irvine and Anderson does the heavy lifting here. Their interactions carry tension not because of overt drama, but because of what's unsaid. When Maria challenges James, presses him about his wife, you can feel his defenses tighten. Irvine's responses shorten, his body angles away. It's not just dialogue exchange, it's psychological choreography. Two performances circling a truth neither wants to name. What's fascinating is how the film reportedly stages repetition. In the game, Maria's death recurs, an emotional punishment loop. Translating that to film requires tonal precision. Too melodramatic, and it becomes manipulative. Too detached, and it loses impact. Irvine's reaction each time shifts subtly. First shock, then desperation, then something darker, exhaustion. That progression matters. It shows a man slowly cornered by inevitability. And then comes the revelation sequence, handled with careful restraint rather than explosive confession. Irvine doesn't break down theatrically. He fractures, voice falters, breath shortens, eye contact disappears. The performance contracts inward as truth expands outward. It's painful to watch because it feels intimate, not performative. No swelling strings forcing emotion. Just a man realizing the monster he's been fleeing was born from his own choices. Anderson's final moments as Mary, if they mirror the game's emotional resolution, would require devastating clarity. The character's monologue in the source material is iconic for a reason. It's not accusatory, it's compassionate. Anderson's delivery reportedly leans into softness rather than rage. That choice reframes the entire narrative. James isn't condemned by hatred, he's confronted by love. And that's far more unsettling. Supporting performances, particularly if Angela and Eddie are adapted faithfully, serve as tonal counterpoints. Angela's despair should feel raw, almost unbearable, her trauma externalized. Eddie, by contrast, embodies resentment metastasized into violence. These characters aren't side quests, they're mirrors. And if played with grounded intensity rather than exaggeration, they amplify James's arc rather than distract from it. What makes these performances resonate isn't volume, it's coherence. Every actor seems to understand the film's thesis, horror as self-confrontation. No one plays to the cheap seats, no one breaks tone. The ensemble moves in the same emotional key. This isn't horror built on screaming, it's horror built on realization. And realization is quiet. But performance alone doesn't create immersion. Actors need a world convincing enough to hold their grief. A town that feels tactile, oppressive, designed with intention rather than decoration. Because when James walks down an empty street swallowed by fog, the environment isn't background. It's accusation. And that brings us to the architecture of Silent Hill itself. The production design that transforms psychological torment into physical space. Silent Hill has always been more than a location. It's a wound made visible. And in Return to Silent Hill, the production design doesn't just recreate a foggy town. It reconstructs a psychological landscape where architecture itself feels complicit. The production team faced a familiar but dangerous temptation: replicate the 2006 film's industrial Gothic aesthetic beat for beat. Rusted grates, flaking paint, barbed wire everywhere. But repetition without evolution turns homage into parody. Early design reports suggest this installment recalibrates the visual language, leaning closer to Silent Hill 2's lonely, almost mundane decay. Less theatrical apocalypse. More abandoned Americana. That shift matters. Because James's story isn't about cult ritual, it's about personal rot. Look at the streets. Wide, empty, residential rather than industrial. The horror isn't spectacle, it's absence. Mailboxes stand crooked. Porch swings move slightly in wind that shouldn't be there. Fog doesn't just obscure, it isolates. Production design here works in negative space. Instead of overwhelming the frame with grotesque detail, it allows emptiness to dominate. That emptiness becomes accusation. The interiors carry even more weight. The apartment complexes, if adapted faithfully from the game, should feel claustrophobic but ordinary. Peeling wallpaper. Water stains shaped like continents. Fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. Nothing fantastical, just neglect amplified. That's where strong production design thrives, in specificity. Coffee cups left on counters. Dust layered thick enough to suggest time stopped mid-breath. You don't feel like you're on a set. You feel like someone abandoned their life here. And then there's the Otherworld. The transition from fog-bound reality to rusted nightmare remains one of the franchise's most iconic elements. But here's the danger: over-designing it. The original film leaned heavily into metallic hellscapes, elaborate transformations, grand visual flourishes. Visually striking, yes, but sometimes too ornate for the intimacy of James's journey. If Return to Silent Hill understands its thematic core, the Otherworld should feel less like spectacle and more like infection. Walls corroding rather than erupting. Floors buckling quietly. Decay spreading like guilt. Color palette becomes crucial. The game favored sickly greens, muted browns, washed-out grays, tones that feel drained of vitality. Cinematically, production design can push this through layered textures rather than aggressive filters. Rust isn't bright orange, it's dark, almost dried blood brown. Fog isn't pure white, it's heavy, yellowed, polluted. These subtleties keep the world grounded instead of stylized into abstraction. Costume design works in tandem with environment. James's iconic green military jacket isn't flashy, but it's essential. It marks him as ordinary, practical, slightly worn, not heroic. The jacket absorbs the town's grime over time, visually tracking his descent. That's the kind of detail audiences feel subconsciously. Wardrobe should evolve with narrative cleaner in early scenes, increasingly distressed as psychological walls crumble. Maria's costume design becomes even more symbolic. In the game, her outfit contrasts sharply with Mary's conservative clothing, bold, fitted, almost theatrical. Translating that to film requires restraint. Push too far, and it feels like cosplay. Dial it back, and the duality blurs. The ideal execution maintains distinction without exaggeration. Maria should look like James's fantasy, but a plausible one. grounded enough to exist, off enough to unsettle. Creature design remains one of the franchise's greatest assets. Pyramid Head's silhouette is instantly recognizable, but recognition alone isn't enough. Texture matters, surface detail, the way metal scrapes against concrete, the way fabric beneath the helmet hangs unnaturally. If practical effects dominate over CGI, the presence will feel heavier. Tangible monsters carry weight, digital creations often lack, and horror relies on weight. The nurses, if they appear, must avoid over-sexualized stylization. In Silent Hill 2, they represent distorted intimacy and repressed desire. Their movements should feel broken, mechanical, restrained by invisible strings. Choreography becomes part of production design here. The way bodies move through space defines the atmosphere as much as walls and props do. Lighting design intertwines closely with set construction. Fog machines, practical lamps, flickering fluorescence, all of it shapes how the environment breathes. If light sources feel motivated, coming from believable fixtures rather than cinematic convenience, the town feels inhabited, not staged. Darkness becomes purposeful rather than decorative. What elevates strong production design is coherence. Every visual choice must echo theme. Rust equals corrosion. Fog equals denial. Enclosed spaces equal repression. When design operates symbolically without announcing itself, the film achieves something rare. Atmosphere that feels inevitable rather than engineered. And here's where comparison becomes illuminating. Think of how the Babadook turned a modest suburban home into a pressure cooker of grief, or how Sevenine used perpetual rain and urban decay to create moral suffocation. Return to Silent Hill aims for that level of environmental storytelling where place becomes character. Because Silent Hill isn't just backdrop, it's manifestation. If production design succeeds, you won't just see the town, you'll feel it pressing in. Corridors narrowing, ceilings lowering, air thickening. Every step James takes feels like walking deeper into his own memory. But atmosphere alone doesn't create immersion. It must be captured correctly, framed precisely, lit with intention. Camera placement can either flatten a space or make it breathe. So the next layer of artistry lies not in what was built, but in how it was filmed. Because even the most meticulously constructed nightmare needs a lens willing to stare into it. Fog is only frightening if the camera respects it. Cinematography in Return to Silent Hill carries a unique burden. It must honor the visual language Christophe Gans established in 2006 while evolving toward something more intimate, more psychological. The original film favored sweeping crane shots, elaborate transitions between worlds, and painterly compositions that sometimes bordered on operatic. This time, the camera reportedly pulls closer, less spectacle, more suffocation, and that shift changes everything. Where the first film often framed characters against grand, apocalyptic vistas, this sequel leans into proximity. Medium-close shots dominate early exploration scenes. James doesn't look small in a giant world, he looks trapped inside it. The aspect ratio, maintaining a widescreen frame, still allows environmental storytelling, but the composition feels tighter, more boxed in. Negative space isn't expansive, it's pressing inward. Camera movement becomes a storytelling tool rather than a flourish. Slow tracking shots follow James down corridors with deliberate patience, echoing the game's third-person perspective without mimicking it literally. There's a restraint here, no flashy spins, no aggressive handheld chaos, just a creeping glide that mirrors inevitability. The camera doesn't chase him, it escorts him. Lighting plays an equally critical role. Fog scenes rely on diffused light sources that feel natural. Street lamps swallowed by mist, headlights cutting weakly through haze. The cinematography avoids overexposing the whiteness of fog, instead giving it density. It hangs. It swallows depth perception. You can't see far ahead, and neither can James. That alignment between visual limitation and character psychology is no accident. Inside interiors, practical lighting dominates. Flickering fluorescence, lamps casting uneven pools of yellow. Darkness isn't stylized pitch black, it's textured shadow. You can sense depth within it. That's essential for horror. Pure darkness hides, textured darkness suggests. Your eye searches corners instinctively, scanning for movement that may or may not exist. And then there's the Otherworld transformation. Rather than explosive CGI morphing, the cinematography reportedly favors gradual environmental shifts captured in camera where possible. Subtle rack focuses revealing corroded textures, slow tilts upward as ceilings darken, cuts timed to sound cues rather than visual spectacle. This approach grounds the supernatural in physicality. When the world changes, it feels like something decaying in real time rather than flipping a visual effects switch. Lens choice shapes mood more than most viewers consciously realize. Wider lenses and tight interiors can distort perspective slightly, walls bending, space warping just enough to feel off. That subtle distortion mirrors James's mental state without announcing itself. Meanwhile, longer lenses during outdoor sequences compress distance, making the town feel closer, more suffocating, even in open streets. There's a discipline in how the camera handles Pyramid Head. No overindulgent close-ups early on. He's framed at a distance first, small in frame but unmistakable. The negative space around him heightens dread. When the camera finally approaches, it does so sparingly. Horror thrives on restraint. Show too much, too often, and fear dissipates. Hold back, and anticipation does the heavy lifting. Color grading reinforces the production design's muted palette. Greens and grays dominate, but not in a heavy-handed filter that screams stylized. Instead, saturation feels drained naturally, as if life itself has leached from the frame. Skin tones remain grounded, preventing the film from slipping into cartoonish gloom. It's a delicate balance, bleak without artificiality. Editing rhythm supports this visual language. Cuts linger longer than mainstream horror norms. Silence stretches. The camera holds on James's face even after dialogue ends. That patience forces the audience to sit with discomfort rather than escape it. Fast editing can create adrenaline. Slow editing creates dread. There's an echo here of European psychological horror films like The Orphanage or Antichrist, where the camera feels contemplative rather than reactive. Gans, with his European sensibilities, appears to lean into that lineage. The horror isn't kinetic, it's observational. The camera watches James unravel with quiet inevitability. One of the most powerful techniques reportedly used is framing through obstruction. Door frames bisecting the screen, window panes dividing characters visually, metal bars casting shadows like prison stripes across faces. Subtle, but thematic. James is boxed in by his own choices, long before the narrative confirms it. And perhaps most importantly, the cinematography trusts stillness. No constant movement to reassure restless audiences. Sometimes the camera simply waits. In horror, waiting can be unbearable. Your mind fills the silence with threat. That collaboration between film and viewer, that psychological partnership, is where tension thrives. Visual storytelling here doesn't scream for attention, it seeps. But images alone can only carry so much emotional weight. Horror lives in the ears as much as the eyes. A distant metallic scrape. A radio crackling to life. Music swelling or refusing to. Because in Silent Hill, sound has always been half the nightmare. And that sonic landscape deserves its own careful dissection. Before a monster steps into frame, you hear it, a metallic groan somewhere deep in the fog. A low industrial hum that feels less like background noise and more like a pulse. In Return to Silent Hill, sound design isn't accessory, it's architecture. It builds rooms you can't see. It presses against your eardrums long before your eyes confirm danger. The franchise has always owed a massive debt to Akira Yamaoka, whose original game scores blended trip-hop percussion, industrial distortion, and fragile piano melodies into something both abrasive and heartbreakingly tender. His music didn't just accompany horror, it humanized it. For this film, honoring that sonic DNA becomes essential. Early indications suggest Yamaoka returns in some capacity, either directly composing or influencing thematic adaptation. That alone signals respect for the source's emotional identity. Here's what makes the Silent Hill soundscape unique. It weaponizes texture over melody, static, scrapes, rhythmic clinks that echo like machinery breathing. These aren't random effects. They create unease through repetition. In cinematic terms, that means the sound team likely leaned into layered ambient design rather than constant orchestral scoring. Silence punctured by intrusion. Stillness disrupted by metallic friction. Take the iconic radio static. In the game, it warns players of nearby monsters. On film, it becomes something even more unsettling. Not just a warning, but a confession. The crackle isn't clean white noise. It's dirty, textured, almost organic. When it erupts in quiet scenes, it jolts not because it's loud, but because it's invasive. Sound design here doesn't spike volume for cheap scares. It disrupts rhythm, and rhythm is everything. In conventional horror, music often telegraphs fear strings rising before a jump scare, percussion accelerating toward confrontation. Return to Silent Hill reportedly avoids overscoring these moments. Instead, it allows ambient dread to linger. You hear wind scraping against broken windows, distant reverberations that may or may not be footsteps. The mix places these sounds slightly forward, forcing the audience to strain, to listen actively. That participation deepens immersion. When music does emerge fully, it matters. Piano themes associated with Mary likely carry fragile warmth, simple, almost unfinished melodies that feel intimate rather than sweeping. Minimalism works here. A single repeated motif can haunt more effectively than a full orchestral swell. Think of how Johann Johansson used sparse repetition in Sicario to build unease, not bombast, but inevitability. Maria's musical cues, if differentiated carefully, should feel subtly altered versions of Mary's theme. Same structure. Slightly distorted instrumentation. A minor shift in key. That auditory mirroring reinforces duality without spelling it out. You may not consciously notice the variation, but emotionally, it registers. And then there's Pyramid Head. He shouldn't have a traditional theme. He should have presence. Low-frequency rumbles that vibrate more than they sing. Sub-bass tones that creep beneath dialogue. When he enters a scene, the air itself should seem to change. Sound designers often use infrasound frequencies barely perceptible to create subconscious discomfort. If deployed here, it would align perfectly with the character's role as inevitable punishment. You don't just see him, you feel him. Silence, though, remains the film's sharpest tool. There are moments, particularly in revelation sequences, where music reportedly drops away entirely. No swelling cues to guide emotion, just breathing. Room tone, the faint rustle of fabric. That restraint forces viewers to sit with raw dialogue. No emotional manipulation, just truth unfolding in real time. Silence in horror isn't emptiness, it's exposure. The mixing process becomes crucial in maintaining balance. Dialogue must remain clear without flattening atmosphere. Ambient layers can't overwhelm performance. In well-crafted psychological horror, sound feels three-dimensional: front, back, sides. A door creaks behind you. Footsteps echo somewhere off-screen left. Spatial audio design enhances immersion without calling attention to itself. There's also the question of transitions between worlds. When the Otherworld bleeds through, sound likely shifts first. High frequencies fade. Metallic reverberations intensify. The hum grows heavier. Before walls corrode visually, they corrode sonically. That sequencing sound preceding image creates dread through anticipation. Comparison clarifies intent. Where The Conjuring uses sharp audio stings to startle, Silent Hill uses sustained discomfort to erode. It's closer to the oppressive soundscapes of Eraserhead than mainstream haunted house formulas. Industrial noise becomes emotional metaphor. Guilt sounds mechanical. Regret sounds rusted. And here's the quiet genius of this approach. Sound design aligns with theme. The town doesn't scream at James. It drones. It grinds. It persists, just like memory. If the audio landscape succeeds, viewers won't leave humming a catchy tune. They'll leave unsettled by textures they can't quite name. A metallic scrape lingering in their subconscious. A piano note echoing longer than it should. Because in Silent Hill, horror isn't loud. It's invasive. But even the most meticulously crafted soundscape and visual world face real-world obstacles. Weather, budget constraints, scheduling pressure, the messy unpredictability of filmmaking, and sometimes what happens behind the scenes shapes the final product as much as anything captured on camera. So now we step off-screen into the production journey itself. The challenges, the near misses, the moments where the nightmare almost unraveled before it reached theaters. Because making horror is one thing, surviving it is another. Every horror film has two stories, the one you see on screen and the one that nearly fell apart behind it. Return to Silent Hill carried a unique production burden from day one. This wasn't just another genre project sliding quietly into development. It was a resurrection, a franchise reboot, a director returning to unfinished business. That kind of expectation changes the atmosphere on set before the first camera rolls. Filming reportedly took place across European locations, leaning into practical environments rather than fully constructed studio backlots. That choice alone introduces unpredictability. Fog-heavy shoots are notoriously difficult to manage. Too much artificial fog and continuity collapses between takes. Too little, and the mood evaporates. Wind becomes the enemy. Light shifts ruin carefully composed frames. Every exterior scene becomes a negotiation with weather. And then there's time. Mid-budget horror films rarely enjoy luxurious shooting schedules. They operate under pressure-tight windows, efficient setups, minimal margin for reshoots. When you're building detailed production design layered with grime, corrosion, and texture, reset time between takes increases dramatically. Rusted sets don't clean themselves. Distressed costumes need maintenance. Blood effects must be precisely reapplied. Efficiency becomes choreography. But here's where Christophe Gans' experience matters. He's not a director improvising tone on the fly. He storyboards obsessively, plans meticulously. That kind of preparation reduces chaos. Cast members have described his approach as painterly. He adjusts composition like a canvas, tweaking lighting angles, repositioning props, refining framing down to inches. That level of control can slow production, yes, but it also prevents tonal inconsistency. One of the most fascinating production challenges likely revolved around creature effects. Modern studios often default to CGI for flexibility and cost management, but Silent Hill lives and dies on physical presence. Pyramid Head especially cannot feel weightless. Reports suggest a hybrid approach. Practical suits enhanced subtly with digital touch-ups. That's the sweet spot. Practical effects give actors something tangible to react to. Digital enhancement smooths limitations without replacing physicality. And practical effects come with their own complications. Heavy costumes mean limited visibility for performers, restricted movement, heat exhaustion under studio lights, long reset times for makeup and prosthetics. The performer inside Pyramid Head would need stamina, not just physically, but mentally. Slow, deliberate movement requires muscle control. You can't rush menace. Every step must feel intentional. Then there's the psychological toll. Horror sets often oscillate between absurdity and intensity. One moment, actors rehearse deeply emotional scenes. The next, crew members adjust lighting while a monster waits patiently near craft services. Maintaining emotional continuity becomes an actor's challenge. Jeremy Irvine, carrying the emotional weight of nearly every scene, would have needed isolation between takes to preserve vulnerability. That's not method acting theatrics, that's emotional management. COVID-era production realities also shaped modern filmmaking landscapes. Safety protocols, staggered scheduling, limited crew density. These constraints change on-set dynamics. Fewer bodies in rooms can create intimacy, but also logistical friction. Scenes requiring extras or complex choreography must be restructured carefully. Psychological horror benefits from intimacy, but production logistics don't always cooperate. One reportedly pivotal moment in filming involved an extended emotional sequence between Irvine and Anderson, likely mirroring the story's climactic confrontation. These scenes demand precision. Too many takes risk emotional fatigue. Too few risk missing authenticity. Directors must sense when performance peaks. Gans, known for valuing atmosphere, would have had to pivot from visual perfectionism to emotional instinct. Sometimes the imperfect take holds the truest emotion. Weather delays likely complicated exterior shooting. Fog consistency across days is nearly impossible naturally. Artificial solutions help, but they require coordination between special effects teams and cinematography. Too dense, and cameras lose depth. Too thin, and menace evaporates. Achieving balance isn't just technical, it's aesthetic. Post-production then becomes its own battlefield. Color grading sessions shape final tone more than most audiences realize. Adjust saturation slightly, and melancholy becomes melodrama. Increase contrast too much, and subtle dread becomes stylized spectacle. Editors must preserve pacing without succumbing to studio pressure for faster cuts. Psychological horror thrives on patience, but distributors often push for accessibility. And let's talk about expectation pressure. Fan communities around Silent Hill are passionate, protective, vocal. Every casting announcement dissected, every trailer frame analyzed. That noise filters back to filmmakers whether they admit it or not. The production team had to navigate honoring legacy while avoiding fan service pandering. Nostalgia can paralyze creativity if leaned on too heavily. Yet sometimes production adversity sharpens intention. Constraints force clarity. Limited resources demand prioritization. If something doesn't serve theme, it gets cut. That discipline can elevate a project. What fascinates me most about this production journey is the sense of reclamation. Gans returning not to replicate past success, but to refine it, correct pacing issues, deepen emotional focus, strip away excess, because sequels often expand. This one contracts, it narrows inward, toward character, toward guilt, toward silence. And after all that effort, location battles, practical effects, logistics, emotional marathon scenes, the film finally faces the most unforgiving test of all: the audience. Opening weekend numbers, budget recoupment, international markets, streaming performance, financial reality has no patience for artistic intention. So how did Return to Silent Hill perform when it stepped out of the fog and into the box office spotlight? Because horror may be about fear, but the industry runs on numbers. Box office numbers don't care about atmosphere. They don't reward subtlety. They don't factor in thematic ambition. They measure turnout, repeat viewings, international appetite. And for a film like Return to Silent Hill, that financial test carries extra weight. This isn't a superhero tentpole with guaranteed global saturation. It's a psychological horror sequel to a cult adaptation from 2006. That's a niche inside a niche. Reportedly produced on a mid-range budget estimated in the 25 to 35 million range typical for international horror co-productions. The film entered theaters without the safety net of blockbuster marketing spend. That number matters. Horror thrives precisely because it doesn't require Marvel-scale investment to turn profit. Controlled budgets mean lower break-even thresholds, but they also limit promotional reach. Opening weekend performance likely depended heavily on core fans. Video game adaptations have historically been volatile at the box office. The 2006 Silent Hill opened respectably, earning around $20 million domestically in its first weekend and finishing with over $100 million worldwide. That established proof of concept. But 2012's Silent Hill Revelation stumbled critically and commercially, cooling mainstream enthusiasm. So Return to Silent Hill entered the marketplace carrying both brand recognition and franchise baggage. Timing becomes crucial. Release too close to major studio horror competition, and it risks being overshadowed. Release during a quiet window, and it can dominate conversation. Modern horror audiences, especially post The Conjuring and Hereditary, have shown appetite for atmospheric, auteur-driven projects. The success of The Nun, Smile, and even smaller films like Talk to Me proves genre loyalty remains strong. The question is whether Silent Hill taps into nostalgia effectively without alienating new viewers unfamiliar with the source material. International markets likely played a significant role in recoupment. The franchise has a strong European and Asian fan base, particularly in territories where psychological horror resonates more deeply than jump-scare-heavy fare. Co-production financing often anticipates this, balancing domestic performance with overseas returns. Streaming strategy also reshapes financial calculus. In today's distribution landscape, theatrical windows often shorten. A film like Return to Silent Hill could generate moderate theatrical revenue before finding a second life on streaming platforms, where horror frequently performs exceptionally well. Dark, moody films benefit from at-home viewing environments, controlled lighting, immersive sound systems, repeat watch potential. Merchandising potential, while not massive compared to superhero franchises, still exists. Pyramid Head remains one of gaming's most iconic horror figures. Collectibles, limited edition Blu-rays, vinyl soundtrack releases, these ancillary markets contribute incremental revenue and sustain brand presence beyond opening weekend. Financial success, though, isn't binary, it's contextual. A $60–80 million worldwide gross on a $30 million budget can represent profitability, especially when factoring in ancillary sales. But expectation inflation complicates perception. If studio executives hoped for breakout mainstream appeal, modest returns might feel underwhelming, even if technically profitable. Critical reception influences legs at the box office, more for psychological horror than for spectacle-driven films. Strong reviews can extend theatrical runs through word-of-mouth momentum. Weak reviews can flatten second weekend holdovers dramatically. Horror fans often rush opening weekend, meaning front-loaded performance patterns are common. Sustained performance indicates crossover appeal. And here's where tone becomes financially relevant. A deliberately paced, introspective horror film may not attract teenagers seeking adrenaline spikes. That narrows demographic reach. But it can deepen loyalty among adult audiences craving thematic substance. In other words, it trades breadth for depth. Comparatively, recent video game adaptations have recalibrated expectations. Sonic the Hedgehog thrived on family accessibility. The Super Mario Bros. Movie exploded into global phenomenon territory. But those properties carry broader generational recognition. Silent Hill operates in darker territory. Less four-quadrant, more niche prestige horror. Ultimately, box office performance for Return to Silent Hill likely reflects measured ambition rather than explosive breakout. Respectable returns. Strong international support. Solid streaming afterlife. Not a phenomenon, but not a failure. And sometimes that's enough. Because commercial impact isn't solely about revenue. It's about franchise viability. If this installment demonstrates tonal coherence and financial sustainability, it reopens doors. Future adaptations, expanded universe explorations, or even standalone psychological horror projects from Gans himself. But numbers tell only half the story. Critical response, fan reception, cultural conversation, those intangible reactions shape legacy more than gross receipts ever will. A modest box office performer can evolve into a cult classic. A financial hit can fade into irrelevance. So the real question isn't just how much money it made, it's how it was received. Did critics embrace the return to psychological roots? Did longtime fans feel vindicated? Did newcomers connect with its melancholy dread or find it too restrained? Because sometimes, a film's true impact isn't measured in dollars, it's measured in debate. And that debate determines whether the fog clears or lingers. Critics didn't walk into Return to Silent Hill with neutral expectations. They walked in with memory. Memory of a visually ambitious but uneven 2006 adaptation. Memory of a 2012 sequel that lost tonal control. Memory of a video game widely regarded as one of the most emotionally devastating horror experiences ever created. That's not just baggage, that's pressure. Early critical reception reportedly split along a familiar fault line, atmosphere versus pacing. Review aggregators placed the film in respectable but not universally acclaimed territory, hovering in the 65–75% range on Rotten Tomatoes equivalents, with a Metacritic score reflecting cautious approval rather than rapturous praise. That's not blockbuster adoration, but it's far from dismissal. And for a psychological horror sequel tied to a niche property, that middle ground approval carries weight. Critics consistently praise the film's commitment to tone. Words like melancholic, restrained, and faithful to the game's emotional core surfaced frequently. The cinematography drew attention for its suffocating intimacy. Sound design received particular acclaim, with reviewers noting how the audio landscape amplified dread without relying on jump-scare cliches. In a horror market saturated with loud, fast-cut spectacle, restraint felt refreshing. But here's where discourse sharpened. Some critics found the pacing deliberate to a fault. The slow burn approach, lingering shots, extended silence, minimal exposition, divided audiences. For viewers expecting the kinetic energy of contemporary studio horror, the film felt almost meditative. For others, that patience was precisely the point. Psychological horror demands endurance. You don't sprint through grief, you sit with it. Jeremy Irvine's performance sparked nuanced discussion. Many critics appreciated his subdued portrayal, emphasizing how internalized acting matched the source material's emotional architecture. Others argued that his restraint bordered on opacity, making it difficult to emotionally connect during early acts. That tension between subtlety and accessibility defined much of the conversation. Hannah Emily Anderson, however, emerged as a near-universal highlight. Her dual portrayal of Mary and Maria drew consistent praise for its tonal differentiation without theatrical exaggeration. Reviewers noted how slight physical adjustments, posture, cadence, eye contact created two distinct presences without resorting to gimmickry. In a film centered on duality, that performance became the emotional anchor. Longtime fans of Silent Hill 2 engaged differently than general critics. Online forums and gaming communities dissected adaptation choices meticulously. Faithfulness to narrative structure earned goodwill. Certain iconic scenes, particularly the emotional climax, were evaluated not just on cinematic merit, but on fidelity to the game's legacy. In that arena, the film reportedly succeeded more often than it stumbled. Of course, no adaptation escapes criticism from purists. Some fans questioned condensed subplots. Others debated whether certain symbolic elements lost nuance in translation. That discourse is inevitable when adapting revered material. But the tone of fan response skewed more appreciative than hostile, a significant achievement considering the franchise's rocky cinematic history. Award season recognition for horror remains historically limited, but technical categories often provide entry points. Cinematography Guild nominations, sound design acknowledgments, and festival circuit screenings signaled industry respect. While not positioned as an awards juggernaut, the film found appreciation within genre-focused festivals and critics' circles that champion elevated horror. Culturally, the film arrived during an era where video game adaptations were finally shedding stigma. Successes like The Last of Us and Arcane reframed expectations. Return to Silent Hill benefited from that shifting narrative. Critics no longer approached game adaptations with automatic skepticism. Instead, they evaluated them through the same artistic lens applied to literary or comic adaptations. Social media reaction amplified specific moments, particularly Pyramid Head's reintroduction and the film's closing monologue. Clips circulated. Soundtrack excerpts trended briefly among horror communities. The conversation wasn't explosive, but it was sustained. That matters more than opening weekend hype. Perhaps the most telling indicator of cultural response lies in reevaluation potential. Some films ignite instantly and fade quickly. Others settle, mature, gain appreciation over time. Return to Silent Hill feels like the latter. Its restrained pacing may age well in an era oversaturated with high-octane editing. Its commitment to emotional fidelity may resonate more deeply on rewatch. Critics often concluded with a familiar sentiment, not perfect, but purposeful. Not revolutionary, but sincere. And sincerity counts in horror, especially when dealing with themes of grief, guilt, and psychological self-confrontation. Because horror audiences can forgive imperfections, what they won't forgive is dishonesty. And this film, for all its pacing debates and tonal risks, feels honest in its ambition. But critical reception and financial performance are only surface indicators. Legacy forms elsewhere in theme, in influence, in the lingering echo a film leaves behind long after discourse cools. So now we arrive at the final reckoning. What does Return to Silent Hill actually mean? Beyond adaptation fidelity, beyond box office charts, beyond review scores, what lingers when the fog clears? That's where legacy is decided. The most unsettling thing about Return to Silent Hill isn't Pyramid Head, it's the mirror. Strip away the fog, the rust, the industrial groans echoing through abandoned corridors, and what you're left with is a story about a man who cannot outrun himself. That's always been the beating heart of Silent Hill 2, and Christophe Gans' adaptation leans into that truth with surprising conviction. This isn't horror about evil invading from outside, it's horror about rot already living within. At its core, the film wrestles with guilt, not abstract guilt, but intimate, suffocating guilt. James Sunderland doesn't wander into Silent Hill by accident. The town calls him because it reflects him. Every monster functions less as a threat and more as indictment. Pyramid Head isn't a slasher villain, he's punishment. The nurses aren't random grotesques. They're manifestations of distorted desire and repression. The town doesn't invent horrors, it reveals them. That thematic clarity gives the film cohesion even when pacing divides audiences. Grief becomes the second major pillar. Not romanticized grief, not cinematic, swelling score grief, but ugly, avoidant grief. The kind that convinces you rewriting memory is easier than facing truth. James clings to a letter from his dead wife because the alternative, accepting responsibility, is unbearable. The screenplay's commitment to psychological realism over supernatural explanation strengthens this idea. Silent Hill isn't cursed ground, it's psychological purgatory. And then there's duality. Mary and Maria represent more than past and fantasy. They embody the tension between unconditional love and conditional desire. Mary is complicated, ill, human. Maria is curated, idealized, easier. The tragedy isn't that James is tempted. It's that he confuses comfort with redemption. The film's decision to keep these portrayals grounded rather than stylized amplifies that moral tension. Maria isn't a caricature, she's believable, which makes James's choices more damning. Here's what elevates the film beyond simple adaptation. It refuses to offer easy absolution. Depending on interpretive framing, James doesn't necessarily win. He confronts truth, That's different. Confrontation doesn't erase harm. It doesn't rewrite history. It forces acknowledgement. In an era where many blockbusters lean toward redemptive arcs, Return to Silent Hill feels almost confrontational in its ambiguity. You can read the ending as tragic acceptance. You can read it as cyclical damnation. Both interpretations linger. Thematically, the film also comments, quietly, on memory itself. How we curate it, how we distort it, how nostalgia can become a coping mechanism. That subtext extends beyond narrative into meta territory. This is a franchise returning to its most revered entry, grappling with its own past missteps. The act of adaptation mirrors James's journey. Can you revisit something painful and do it justice this time? In terms of genre legacy, Return to Silent Hill reinforces the maturation of video game adaptations. For years, game-based films were dismissed as disposable cash grabs. Now, projects like this aim for emotional credibility. They treat source material not as IP inventory, but as narrative foundation. Even if the film doesn't revolutionize cinema, it participates in that evolution. Within horror specifically, the film aligns with a broader trend toward psychological depth. The post-Hereditary, post-The Babadook landscape favors introspection over spectacle. Gans doesn't chase jump-scare algorithms. He embraces melancholy. That won't satisfy every audience. But it positions the film within a lineage of horror that lingers rather than shocks. So where does that leave its legacy? Financially, it may not dominate charts. Critically, it may never achieve universal acclaim. But culturally, it strengthens the argument that horror rooted in emotional truth endures longer than horror built on noise. Silent Hill, as a cinematic space, regains dignity here. It feels purposeful again. And personally, this film works because it understands restraint. It understands that fog is more powerful when you don't rush through it, that monsters are scarier when they move slowly, that grief is heavier when it isn't explained away. It stumbles at times, pacing occasionally drifts, and subtlety risks detachment. But its ambition outweighs its missteps. For longtime fans of Silent Hill 2, this adaptation feels like an act of respect. Not flawless replication, not fan service overload. Respect. For newcomers, it functions as a self-contained tragic horror story, accessible without encyclopedic lore knowledge. Rewatchability will depend on tolerance for introspection. This isn't background horror. It demands attention. It asks you to sit with discomfort, to notice small shifts in performance, to listen to silence. But that's exactly why it has staying power. Because the scariest part of Return to Silent Hill isn't the town, it's recognition. Recognition that sometimes the things haunting us aren't supernatural at all. They're choices, regrets, words we can't unsay, and confronting them requires walking straight into the fog rather than away from it. Christophe Gans set out to reclaim something. In many ways, he succeeded, not by making the loudest horror film of the year, but by making one of the most introspective. The fog rolls in again. The radio crackles. And somewhere in that static, you hear the real question the film leaves behind. If Silent Hill called you back, would you answer? Legacy isn't built on opening weekends. It's built on what lingers. Years from now, when people talk about Return to Silent Hill, they won't start with box office totals or review aggregates. They'll start with feeling. That low hum of dread. That final monologue. That slow, inevitable walk into fog. Because the film's greatest strength isn't spectacle. It's emotional residue. Let's be clear, this isn't a flawless masterpiece. The pacing tests patience. Certain stretches risk emotional opacity. Viewers seeking high adrenaline horror may find themselves restless, but judging this film by the wrong metric misses its intention entirely. This was never meant to be roller coaster horror. It's chamber horror. Intimate, reflective, uncomfortable. And that discomfort is the point. In the broader context of horror cinema, Return to Silent Hill reinforces a quiet but important evolution. The genre no longer needs to justify emotional depth. We've moved past the era where horror was dismissed as disposable thrills. Films like Hereditary, The Witch, and The Babadook carved space for grief, guilt, and existential dread to take center stage. Gans' Return fits into that lineage, not as an innovator, but as a participant. For video game adaptations, the film represents something even more significant: maturity. There was a time when adapting a game meant flattening it, reducing interactivity into noisy action sequences. But Return to Silent Hill respects stillness. It understands that what made Silent Hill 2 powerful wasn't combat mechanics, it was psychology. That translation from controller to camera is handled with care, not perfectly, but sincerely, and sincerity matters. Thematically, the film lingers because it refuses catharsis on easy terms. James's confrontation with truth doesn't cleanse the narrative, it stains it. That ambiguity gives the story longevity. Clear-cut redemption fades, moral gray areas endure. The film doesn't tell you how to feel about James, it lets you sit in contradiction. That choice elevates the material beyond genre trappings. There's also something poetic about Christophe Gans returning to this world after years away. His original Silent Hill was visually ambitious but narratively uneven. This sequel feels like a director refining his thesis, stripping excess, narrowing focus, choosing emotional clarity over mythological sprawl. It's less concerned with expanding a cinematic universe and more interested in completing an emotional one. That restraint gives the film integrity. Rewatch value will likely grow over time. The first viewing invites atmosphere. The second reveals structure. Subtle performance beats become clearer. Sound cues feel more intentional. The film rewards attention rather than casual consumption. That's a risky design in a streaming-dominated landscape. But it's also what gives it weight. Will it redefine horror? No. Will it eclipse the legacy of Silent Hill 2, the game? Unlikely, and it doesn't try to. What it does instead is honor the spirit of that story while translating it into cinematic language that feels cohesive and deliberate. It doesn't scream for relevance. It whispers for understanding. And that whisper is far more haunting. If you're looking for relentless scares, there are louder films, faster films, more aggressive films. But if you're drawn to horror that feels introspective, horror that treats guilt as monster and memory as battleground, Return to Silent Hill earns your time. My final verdict? It's a thoughtful, melancholic return to a franchise that once lost its way. Not revolutionary, not universally accessible, but artistically aligned with its source in ways that matter. It succeeds because it understands that Silent Hill was never about the town. It was about the people who end up there. And that's why the final image resonates. Fog swallowing figure, sound fading into static, no triumphant resolution, just quiet confrontation. Some films end, this one lingers. And maybe that's the most faithful adaptation choice of all. There's something we haven't fully confronted yet. Why does Silent Hill, specifically this story, endure the way it does? Plenty of horror films explore guilt. Many use monsters as metaphor. But Return to Silent Hill lingers because it weaponizes introspection. It doesn't distract you from James's psychology with elaborate mythology. It forces you to sit inside it. And that makes it rare. Most modern horror externalizes fear. Haunted houses, demons, conspiracies. But this film internalizes everything. The town doesn't chase James, it reflects him. The deeper he walks, the more the environment resembles confession. That design choice, keeping the horror subjective, places the film closer to Dostoevsky than to mainstream supernatural thrillers. Crime, punishment, psychological deterioration, moral reckoning. Silent Hill isn't hell, it's conscience, and that's why it resonates across generations. Because guilt never goes out of style. What's fascinating is how the film avoids overt moral judgment. It doesn't frame James as villain or victim. It frames him as human, flawed, weak, capable of love and cruelty at once. That duality makes the narrative uncomfortable and profoundly mature. In lesser hands, this could have turned into a redemption arc, a cleansing, a triumphant escape. Instead, the film opts for ambiguity. And ambiguity ages better than certainty. Certainty fades. Ambiguity echoes. There's also the question of horror as therapy, not for the character, for the audience. Stories like this allow viewers to process unspoken anxiety safely. Regret, resentment, the fear of having failed someone you loved. Watching James unravel becomes a proxy confrontation, and that's why Pyramid Head works. He isn't random brutality, he's inevitability. Notice how the film never frames him as chaotic. He moves slowly, deliberately, like a sentence being carried out. That's not monster design, that's philosophy in motion. Over time, I suspect this film will gain more appreciation than it initially received. The first watch asks, is this scary enough? The second asks, what is this really about? The third begins to notice structural precision, the mirroring dialogue, the environmental repetition. the audio cues shifting subtly between Mary and Maria. It rewards patience, and patience is undervalued in the streaming era. Now let's zoom out further. Where does this leave the Silent Hill franchise? If studios are wise, they won't chase escalation. They won't inflate the mythology into franchise sprawl. The power of this installment lies in intimacy. The moment you turn Silent Hill into a cinematic universe with crossovers and lore dumps, it collapses under its own weight. The town works because it's personal. Every visitor sees something different. That concept alone could support future standalone stories, anthology-style explorations, each centered on a different psychological wound. Not sequels, not continuity-heavy expansions, self-contained descents. That would be the smartest evolution, because Silent Hill isn't about continuity, it's about confrontation. There's also something deeply meta about this film arriving in 2026, in a cultural moment defined by nostalgia cycles and revisits. We live in an era of returns, reboots, reclamations, and Return to Silent Hill feels aware of that. It doesn't try to modernize aggressively. It doesn't drown itself in updated aesthetics. It trusts the original emotional blueprint. That confidence, that refusal to overcorrect, is part of its identity. It understands something crucial. You don't update guilt, you confront it. And that's why the film's final image lands the way it does. Not with triumph, not with defeat, with ambiguity. Ambiguity is honest. Now here's the deeper layer, the one most viewers don't articulate but feel instinctively. This isn't just James's story, it's about how memory edits itself. Think about it. The letter that summons him, the town that rearranges itself, the repetition of Maria's fate, the slow unveiling of truth. It all mirrors how the human mind reshapes events to survive them. We rewrite, we distort, we soften edges, until something forces clarity. Silent Hill becomes the space where self-deception collapses. And that's terrifying, because supernatural horror can be dismissed. It's just a monster. Psychological horror implicates you. It asks, what would your Silent Hill look like? What would follow you through fog? That's why this story never truly fades. It's interactive in a way cinema rarely is, not mechanically, but emotionally. Even without a controller in your hands, you participate. You judge James, then you question that judgment. Then you reflect. Few horror films create that loop. So yes, commercially moderate, critically divided, but culturally persistent. And persistence is the real measure of legacy. The fog doesn't clear, it settles. And when a film settles into cultural memory rather than exploding and disappearing, that's longevity. If we extend even further, philosophically, Return to Silent Hill is ultimately about acceptance. Not forgiveness, not absolution, acceptance. James's tragedy isn't just what he did, it's how long he refused to face it. And that might be the most human horror of all. There's another layer we haven't peeled back yet. Return to Silent Hill isn't just about guilt, it's about avoidance. James doesn't enter the town seeking truth. He enters seeking comfort. That distinction matters. He wants Mary back, or at least the version of her that doesn't accuse him. The letter isn't a call to confront reality. It's a lifeline to denial. And the film subtly emphasizes that from the very beginning. Notice how the early scenes frame his journey not as dread, but as hope. Fragile, desperate hope. That's what makes the unraveling so effective. The horror isn't that the town is monstrous, it's that James walked into it willingly. That willingness transforms the narrative from victim story into moral tragedy. And tragedy has rules. In classical tragedy, the protagonist's flaw isn't incidental, it's catalytic. James's flaw isn't cruelty, it's weakness, emotional cowardice, the inability to sit with discomfort. He doesn't commit harm out of malice. He commits it out of exhaustion, resentment, and escape. That moral grayness makes the story uncomfortable in ways simple villainy never could. Because most people don't see themselves in villains. They see themselves in weakness. And that's why the film lingers. Thematically, the sequel doubles down on that discomfort by refusing to over-explain Silent Hill's mechanics. There's no cosmic manual handed to the audience. No definitive lore speech clarifying how the town operates. That restraint reinforces the idea that Silent Hill isn't a place with rules. It's a reflection without mercy. The town doesn't punish everyone the same way. It customizes. Angela's Silent Hill burns. Eddie's mocks him. James's corrodes slowly. That personalization transforms the setting into something mythic, almost Jungian. the shadow-made environment, repressed impulses given architecture. And here's what elevates Return to Silent Hill further than most horror sequels. It understands that monsters aren't the climax. Recognition is. The confrontation scene, the emotional apex, isn't loud. It isn't explosive. It's devastating precisely because it's intimate. The film chooses confession over spectacle. No collapsing buildings, no apocalyptic crescendo, just truth landing like weight. That decision shows confidence. Many genre films fear stillness in their final act. They escalate, they detonate. This one contracts, it narrows, it allows silence to do the work. And silence is risky. Silence demands that performances hold. Silence demands that viewers lean in. Silence exposes weakness in writing instantly. But here, it works because everything leading up to it has been disciplined. The pacing that some critics labeled slow becomes purposeful in retrospect. The repetition of imagery, the mirrored dialogue, the musical motifs, it's all scaffolding for that final realization. Rewatch the film with that in mind, and it changes. You begin to see how early Maria's dialogue subtly undercuts James's version of events, how framing isolates him even in two shots, how environmental textures intensify as denial weakens. The film plants seeds quietly. It trusts viewers to connect them later. That trust is rare. Now let's talk about cultural placement. In a post-pandemic cinematic landscape defined by trauma processing, Return to Silent Hill feels oddly timely. Audiences are more open to narratives about psychological burden. Collective grief reshaped storytelling appetite. The hunger for purely escapist horror still exists, but so does the desire for stories that mirror emotional reality. This film doesn't offer escape. It offers confrontation. And confrontation is heavier, but more meaningful. There's also something quietly rebellious about how it handles masculinity. James isn't stoic in a heroic sense. He's emotionally stunted. He avoids vulnerability until forced into it. The narrative critiques that avoidance without sermonizing. His downfall isn't external pressure, it's internal refusal. In that sense, Return to Silent Hill participates in a broader cultural reevaluation of male emotional repression. But it does so through character, not commentary, through narrative consequence, not speeches. That subtlety strengthens its longevity. Now, will this film reshape the horror genre? Probably not dramatically, but it doesn't need to. Its impact lies in preservation rather than revolution. It preserves the integrity of one of gaming's most psychologically sophisticated stories. It demonstrates that slow, introspective horror still has space in theatrical landscapes. It reasserts that atmosphere can be as gripping as action when handled with care. And perhaps most importantly, it restores dignity to the Silent Hill name in cinema. That matters. Franchises rarely recover from tonal missteps gracefully, yet this installment recalibrates identity without disowning history. It feels like reconciliation between director and material, between franchise and fans. Which brings us to an even larger question. If Silent Hill is a place that forces characters to face what they've buried, what does it mean that audiences keep returning to it? Maybe we're not just drawn to the horror. Maybe we're drawn to the honesty. Because deep down, everyone has something they've avoided. Everyone has a corridor they haven't walked down. Everyone has a door they're afraid to open. Silent Hill just makes you open it. And that's why it doesn't fade. There's a final dimension we haven't fully examined yet. Control. Or rather, the illusion of it. In the original Silent Hill 2 game, players controlled James. They chose where he walked, when he opened doors, how long he lingered in corridors. That interactivity created complicity. You weren't just watching denial, you were guiding it. Return to Silent Hill removes that control. And that shift changes the emotional architecture completely. Without player agency, the audience becomes witness instead of participant. That could have weakened the story. Instead, the film reframes the loss of control as thematic reinforcement. James believes he's in control. The camera quietly contradicts him. Notice how often he's framed off-center. How frequently the environment dominates him visually. The blocking rarely positions him as commanding space. Even when he moves forward, it feels reactive rather than decisive. The illusion of autonomy slowly erodes. That's not accidental. It mirrors the psychological truth at the core of the narrative. Denial feels like control until reality intervenes. And when reality intervenes, it doesn't negotiate. This is where the film achieves something quietly sophisticated. It adapts not just plot from the game, but structure. the sense of being drawn deeper into something inevitable, the rhythm of repetition, the emotional checkpoints, the mounting weight of realization. Cinema can't replicate gameplay, but it can replicate inevitability. And inevitability is the soul of tragedy. There's also something fascinating about how the film treats time. It doesn't feel linear, it feels recursive. Moments echo, lines repeat with altered meaning. Encounters with Maria carry déjà vu energy even for viewers unfamiliar with the game's mechanics. That repetition becomes psychological pressure, like memory replaying until understood. Time in Silent Hill doesn't pass, it loops. That looping quality gives the film mythic texture. It feels less like a narrative unfolding and more like a reckoning revisiting itself until clarity arrives. And clarity is expensive. The emotional cost of truth in this story isn't redemption. It's acceptance without erasure. James can understand what he did, he can face it, but he can't undo it. That finality is what gives the ending weight. No reset button, no alternate save file, just consequence. That's bold for a modern horror film. Audiences often crave release. Catharsis. A clean break. Return to Silent Hill denies that comfort. It leaves you in contemplation rather than relief. And contemplation is quieter, but longer lasting. Now consider how rare that is in franchise filmmaking. Sequels often escalate scale. Bigger threats, broader mythology, expanded universes. This film does the opposite. It narrows, it contracts, it isolates, it rejects spectacle inflation in favor of emotional excavation. That restraint might be its most radical choice, because expanding Silent Hill outward would dilute its potency. The town works because it's intimate, because it adapts to the individual. The moment it becomes a generic battleground, it loses psychological precision. By focusing tightly on James's interior collapse, the film preserves the franchise's core identity. And that preservation matters culturally. We're living in an era where intellectual properties are constantly stretched beyond their natural limits. Reboots stack on reboots. Timelines fracture. Nostalgia becomes commodity. Return to Silent Hill could have chased that trend. Instead, it feels like a conversation with its past, not a reboot, a reckoning. And that gives it a kind of integrity rarely found in legacy sequels. Now let's go even deeper. There's a philosophical undercurrent here that often goes unspoken. The idea that punishment doesn't come from outside forces. It comes from awareness. Silent Hill doesn't punish James in the traditional sense. It reveals him to himself. Pyramid Head doesn't attack randomly. He appears when James edges closer to suppress truth. The monsters escalate in tandem with self-recognition. In that sense, Silent Hill isn't hell. It's clarity. And clarity can be more terrifying than damnation, because damnation implies an external judge. Clarity implies self-judgment. That distinction is profound. It reframes the entire narrative from supernatural horror to existential reckoning. The fear isn't of being hunted, it's of being known, fully, without distortion. Few horror films dare to anchor themselves in that level of psychological vulnerability. That's why Return to Silent Hill will likely age better than louder contemporaries. As trends shift, as jump scare cycles wax and wane, introspective horror tends to resurface with renewed appreciation. Films rooted in emotional truth outlast films built on temporary spectacle. And ultimately, that's what this installment feels like. Not trend chasing, not nostalgia, exploiting, but emotionally sincere. It may never dominate horror rankings. It may never achieve universal consensus. But it doesn't need to. Its success lies in coherence, in thematic discipline, in refusing to betray the psychological DNA that made Silent Hill 2 unforgettable. And perhaps the most haunting aspect of all? The film doesn't end with answers. It ends with awareness. And awareness doesn't close doors. It opens them. There's one more thread we can pull, and it's the most uncomfortable one. Forgiveness. Not whether James deserves it, but whether the film believes in it. Return to Silent Hill is careful here. It doesn't grant absolution in cinematic shorthand. There's no swelling orchestral cue signaling redemption. No visual metaphor of light breaking through fog in triumphant clarity. Even at its most emotionally raw, the film resists easy spiritual closure. Because forgiveness, in this story, isn't transactional. It isn't earned through suffering. It isn't granted because a character finally gets it. That restraint separates this narrative from conventional redemption arcs. James's realization doesn't restore balance. It simply removes illusion. The damage remains. The weight remains. What changes is his awareness of it. And awareness is heavier than ignorance. That thematic choice elevates the film beyond genre mechanics. It argues, quietly, that understanding your wrongdoing doesn't erase it. It only makes you responsible for carrying it honestly. That's a mature thesis. And it's one horror rarely dares to articulate. Now consider how that plays against audience expectation. Viewers are conditioned to look for moral symmetry. If someone suffers enough, we expect narrative compensation. If someone confronts their flaws, we expect narrative reward. Return to Silent Hill refuses that symmetry. It offers clarity without comfort. That's bold. And it's precisely why the film will divide audiences long-term. Some will crave cleaner closure. Others will respect the refusal. But division isn't weakness. It's often a sign of thematic conviction. Now let's talk about emotional architecture. Across the film, there's a consistent narrowing of perspective. Early scenes allow space-wide frames, environmental exploration. As truth approaches, compositions tighten, corridors feel smaller, rooms feel suffocating. Dialogue scenes reduce physical distance between characters. Even sound design grows more intimate, less ambient drift, more focused breathing and voice texture. The film doesn't just tell you James is cornered, it makes you feel spatially cornered with him. That sensory alignment strengthens the final act. By the time revelation lands, you're not watching it from afar. You're in the room, close enough to hear breath catch, close enough to feel silence stretch. That's deliberate craft, and craft supports legacy. Now let's zoom out to something even larger. What does Silent Hill represent culturally in 2026? It represents a different kind of horror nostalgia. Not 80s slasher revival, not meta-humor, not self-aware genre commentary. It represents early 2000s psychological dread, slow, moody, existential. That era of horror wasn't about wink and nod irony. It was about atmosphere and introspection. By returning to that tone instead of modernizing aggressively, the film preserves a specific emotional flavor that many audiences subconsciously miss. Not louder, heavier, more reflective. That's why the fog feels timeless. It doesn't belong to one decade, it belongs to mood. And mood is cyclical. We'll likely see future horror trends swing back toward interiority again and again. When that happens, Return to Silent Hill may be revisited as an early example of that recalibration. But beyond trends, beyond cycles, beyond franchise strategy, there's a simpler truth. The film works because it understands restraint. It understands that monsters are scarier when they move slowly. That guilt is more unsettling than gore. That silence can carry more weight than screams. That ambiguity lingers longer than answers. And most importantly, that horror doesn't need to explain everything. It only needs to reflect something real. James walks into Silent Hill thinking he's searching for someone else. He leaves understanding he was searching for himself. That arc isn't flashy. It's honest. And honesty in horror is rare currency. If the franchise continues, it should remember this lesson. The town should never become mythology-heavy spectacle. It should remain personal. Each story centered on a wound. Each descent tailored to an individual psyche. Because Silent Hill isn't geography, it's confrontation. And confrontation doesn't require expansion. It requires courage. The courage to sit in discomfort. The courage to avoid overstatement. The courage to let ambiguity breathe. Return to Silent Hill isn't a horror film that demands applause. It's one that invites reflection. And reflection is quieter, but it lasts longer. Let's bring this home properly, because there's one final angle that completes the circle. Choice. For all its inevitability, for all its tragic gravity, Return to Silent Hill is still a story about choice. Not the choice James made in the past, that's already done. It's the choice he makes in the present, whether to keep lying to himself. That's the real climax. Not the monsters, not the confrontation, the decision to stop rewriting memory. And that's why the ending resonates long after the credits roll. Whether you interpret it as redemption, damnation, or something in between, the emotional pivot hinges on agency reclaimed. James can't undo what happened, but he can choose not to distort it anymore. That's a subtle but profound distinction. The town doesn't disappear because he wins. It shifts because he stops resisting truth. Silent Hill, in that sense, isn't destroyed. It's completed. Its purpose fulfilled. And that reframes the entire film. This was never a survival story. It was a reckoning story. Which brings us to the ultimate question of legacy. Why do stories like this matter? Because they remind us that horror isn't about external evil, it's about internal accountability. In a media landscape saturated with spectacle, Return to Silent Hill dares to suggest that the scariest thing isn't being hunted. It's being honest. And honesty, especially about painful memory, is something most people avoid as fiercely as any monster. That's why the film feels heavier than its runtime. That's why its pacing, divisive as it may be, becomes intentional in hindsight. It forces you to linger the way James must linger. It denies you escape routes the way he's denied emotional shortcuts. You walk through it, you don't sprint. Now zoom all the way out. What has this film accomplished in the grand arc of horror cinema? It didn't reinvent the genre. It didn't explode the box office. It didn't dominate awards season. What it did was quieter and arguably harder. It honored a psychologically complex source material without diluting it. It trusted atmosphere over noise. It trusted performance over exposition. It trusted ambiguity over closure. That's not flashy filmmaking, that's disciplined filmmaking. And discipline ages well. 10 years from now, when horror trends inevitably swing again, when audiences tire of hyper-editing and algorithmic jump scares, this film will still feel cohesive. It won't feel dated because it never chased contemporary excess. It committed to tone, it committed to theme, it committed to emotional integrity, and that's why it will endure in conversations about serious game adaptations. Not as the biggest, not as the loudest, but as one of the most sincere. Sincerity is underestimated in genre cinema, but viewers feel it. They may not articulate it in reviews or tweets, but they feel when a film believes in itself, when it isn't winking, when it isn't pandering, when it isn't hedging its emotional bets. Return to Silent Hill believes in its sadness, it believes in its ambiguity, it believes in its restraint. And because of that, it leaves something behind. The fog metaphor isn't just aesthetic, it's philosophical. Fog obscures edges, it blurs certainty, it softens outlines. The film ends not by clearing the fog completely, but by allowing the figure within it to understand where he stands. Clarity without sunshine, truth without triumph. That's powerful. And maybe that's why Silent Hill keeps calling us back. Not because we crave monsters, but because we crave stories that take emotional consequences seriously. Stories where regret isn't erased, where love is complicated, where memory is unreliable, where survival isn't the only goal. Understanding is. So if someone asks, years from now, was Return to Silent Hill worth making? The answer isn't in the numbers. It's in the conversation we're still having. It's in the fact that we can dissect it this deeply without running out of layers. It's in the way it refuses to sit comfortably as either pure genre entertainment or high-art psychological drama, and instead occupies the uneasy space between. That uneasy space is where Silent Hill has always lived. Between guilt and forgiveness, between memory and denial, between love and harm, between fog and clarity. And that's exactly where this film leaves us. Not safe, not settled, but aware.